Hey, welcome. It's Off Planet Radio, Off Planet TV. I'm Randy Moggins, and as you can see, Emily's jumping the gun already.
Not me.
Oh, no, not you. So we're going to have a fun conversation here. We've got Dani Katz with us, and Emily's going to tell you all about her.
All righty, guys. This is something a little different, and I'm super excited about this. So our guest is someone I knew in my childhood. After 30 plus years, we reconnected after months of commenting on each other's Facebook posts concerning election nonsense, Pizzagate, and fake news. Getting to know her has been a highlight of the past year for me. She established her reputation as one of LA's finest literary talents by way of her bold voice, expanded perspective, and mastery of language. She has published hundreds of articles in LA Weekly, the LA Times, Vice, Whole Life Times, Swindle, LA Yoga, Santa Fe Reporter, Nerve.com, and Reality Sandwich. She has spent the past several years immersed in the study of quantum languaging, conscious communication, researching and perfecting the myriad ways, whys, and hows that language influences our every human experience. Some of you who follow me on Facebook may know her for the adorable drawings and wily wordplay she puts out on an almost daily basis. Dani Katz, welcome to Off Planet Radio.
Thank you.
Awesome to have you here.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome to be here.
Cool.
We get to hang out together.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. So why don't you just, you're like a super interesting person. There's so many ways to go with this, but why don't you just kind of tell people a little about who you are, sort of where you're coming from, and yeah, your background.
Okay. My background, I got a master's degree in journalism from USC, and where should I start?
Wherever you want, finish wherever you want. Time doesn't exist. We'll loop back around. It's all good.
Great. I spent time writing the news for CNN, and then kind of taking a break from journalism to travel around the world and go to India and take a bunch of psychedelics and really devote myself to deprogramming my mind, my spirit, get the sort of like cultural claws out of me. And when I emerged, not that process is ever complete, after 9/11, I was producing and writing the news for KPFK. And that's when I kind of went back into journalism and started writing for the LA Weekly again and working for a documentary producer. So I wrote mostly for the LA Weekly for about 9 years. I was considered their nutter butter writer, and I wrote a lot about progressive culture and wellness and Burning Man and entheogens and anything that was just sort of weird and out there. And then I left journalism to write a book, and I've sort of like slowly slipped back in a little bit in the past few years, but the game has changed so much that I've really turned my attention to more subversive means of getting the truth out, through my art and through books and screenplays and blogs and more independent means of expression.
So, okay, can you expand a little bit on, you said you left journalism to write a book, but there was other stuff going on, which is why, the real reason why you left journalism. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think we're, for many years now, but it's becoming blatantly obvious to even normal people now that journalism is in a complete and total crisis. It practically doesn't exist anymore. And can you fill us in a little bit on what was going on?
I can. I was in journalism school at a really interesting time. I was in journalism school during the OJ Simpson trials. So I was like front and center to watch and study the fall of journalism.
Yeah,
which
that started with that for sure. Yeah.
It totally started with that. And it was, I mean, actually, historically, they say it started with Pee Wee Herman.
Oh, Pee Wee Herman.
Allegedly, it started with Pee Wee Herman, and that was like sort of when journalism went to shit, and it started to like just try to fuck people over instead of being focused on what was relevant or newsworthy, or like, why would anyone need to know this? And the sort of story around how the journalists got that information is a little shady. But anyways, so when I was in journalism school, I studied the fall of journalism by way of the OJ Simpson trial. And I was working in some more established newsrooms at that time. And it turned me off because with the whole like turn and burn, there wasn't time for like in-depth reporting and investigative journalism, which was what had always turned me on. So I kind of stepped away. And then I just traveled the world. And at that point, I knew enough from my time in journalism school and from my time at CNN that like the dominant narratives were bullshit. So then I spent a bunch of years traveling around Southeast Asia and India and Central America. And from being in the ground, started to get more of a full picture of how the world was actually working. And then after 9/11, I was inspired to get back in the game because I definitely have that, like, I want to be a truth teller. And so that's when I was producing and writing for KPFK. And at the same time, I was researching documentaries for a guy named William Gazecki, who did the movie Crop Circle's Quest for Truth. He did a bunch of other documentaries as well. But part of my job was researching documentaries and just, again, like studying how the world was actually working. And I had a good thing going at KPFK for a while because we were really allowed to expose what was going on and dive deep. And when Bush named, you know, North Korea into the axis of evil, and I didn't understand why, the news director was like, call North Korea, like, figure it out. And so I had the time and the space to do that. And then things started getting wonky, and the news director was fired on a dime out of nowhere. A new news director was put into place. And that same week I'd been there for well over a year, and I pitched a good news segment, like once a week. We had a daily news show. So like once a week, let's do a 60-second good news segment. And I was immediately fired and told that I didn't understand what we were trying to do there. So in my mind, he was a CIA plant. I don't have any proof of that, but it was all very fishy and happened really fast, and there wasn't clear, open, transparent communication about it, and it was really super frustrating.
Yeah, you're the second guest we've had on that's been fired from KPFK with almost no notice and with no explanation. So that lands you in the good company of Cynthia McKinney. And yeah, I think her assessment of what's going on there would be very similar to your assessment.
Yeah.
Even 60 seconds of good news is too much, right? That's
way too much.
Okay, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. But I was writing for LA Weekly, and I had a lot of free reign, but at the same time, I wasn't doing hard hitting news. I was writing more about art and, you know, sex and relationships. And I had a really good setup there as well. And at the same time, whenever I pitched hard-hitting stories, like I wanted to go underground and do a cover story on the process of going sovereign and, you know, expose that the IRS is an illegal private entity. And when I would pitch stories like that, my editor's eyes would just kind of glaze over and be like, sure. And obviously that never happened. Around the 2008 election, I was still in like fight mode. And even though I wasn't doing hard news, my editor was. So I would send him YouTube clips and articles of like, expose this, and this is what's really going on. And, you know, you have a duty to show the public. And all of it was ignored. And that's something that I've noticed is so frustratingly common in like established newsroom, is just the unwillingness to look at information, which is, I feel like that's the responsibility. So that was really, really frustrating for me. Then the Village Voice came in and fired our editors, and they did a big sweep. And I didn't like the LA Weekly anymore, and I kind of left. But I was still blogging for Reality Sandwich mostly, and for some other blogs, and just kind of like doing the freelance hustle. But in the past few years, it's gotten it's gotten harder to get my message out. I'm too much of a risk for those people at this point. And
so even at Reality Sandwich and Vice, which are supposed to be underground kind of news sources, your stuff is too risque, too dangerous, too truthful.
Right. Well, I mean, I've had more of an established relationship with Reality Sandwich throughout the years, and I do consider them, Vice says they're progressive, and they might be progressive for the mainstream. But as far as I'm concerned, like, they generally think my pitches are too out there. I have written for Vice before, but Reality Sandwich was where, and I don't want to slag them because they're lovely people. But I thought, like, even though it's not a huge platform, I had a lot of freedom, and they really supported me in writing what I wanted to write. But in the past few, I would say just 2 years, they've gotten really gun shy, and my pitches are too out there, and they've told me that they don't want to deal with the pushback, and the editor has told me, as a white male, he doesn't feel comfortable rubbing up against other sort of identity politics based agendas that are going to put him in the line of fire. And basically, like, there's no place, I don't want to limit myself. Right now in this political climate, I'm not really finding a lot of available platforms for my specific angle of cultural criticism, which is why I've pulled my attention out, because that just feels like a zero-sum game at this point. And I'm putting it more into writing my own stuff, writing books, writing television, and just getting it out in a different way, because there is no free speech anymore. There is no free press anymore. Like, that is a total freaking fallacy.
So we're going to get into all the things that you're doing now. That's totally what we're going to get into in the second hour. For right now, can you talk a little bit about the political climate, about, I'd mentioned how we sort of came together again because we seem to be like two of the only people in our threat amongst our sort of groups of people. My group was a little more accepting of some of the stuff that we talk about than your group was. But, the political nonsense, the pedophilia, and then the all of a sudden we have to have censorship because of the pedophilia kind of thing.
Can we back up?
Yeah.
Bump up against this. I'm curious to know the identity politics issue, and exactly, if you can tell me what it is they perceive as so threatening by identity politics.
Sure. And this also plays into Emily's question as well.
Yeah, it does.
I had written a piece for Reality Sandwich back in 2013 that was looking at gender reassignment surgery through the lens of the 53rd gene key. And I'm really into the gene keys, which is a transmission that delineates each of the 64 DNA codons as a pathway to enlightenment. And so I use this specific key to talk about gender reassignment surgery. And no place in the article was there like, we shouldn't have gender reassignment surgery. I'm all for freedom and do whatever we want to do. And the gist was, well, it's a law of evolution that life evolves to transcend and include. And if we're cutting off our genitals, we're not including, we're dividing. And so
that's really interesting. They're using evolution to justify gender reassignment. There's a whole world out there I apparently know nothing about. This is intriguing.
Well, this was before the trans conversation really hit and got huge. This was before.
She's always ahead of everyone else to the issue. So
yeah, so this was before it was a big giant thing, and there was so much pushback that Reality Sandwich was really shocked. I was really shocked, and there were a lot of hate tweets, and there were a lot of letters, and there was a lot of, I guess, drama. And so I guess that kind of put me on thin ice with them, which was weird because I would think that would be the type of thing that would make me a more attractive journalist. Like, I wrote a lot of controversial pieces for the LA Weekly, and they kind of dug it anyway. So when Black Lives Matter started getting a lot of traction, I think that was maybe like 2 years ago, and it started becoming like more of a mainstream thing. Yeah. I went to one of the big meetings. I don't know if it was in Inglewood. I think it was. And I wanted to write about the languaging and just how inherent in the name and in the branding Black Lives Matter, that was a movement that was doomed to fail. And while the ambitions may as well be in integrity and lovely, though I can't really tell because I'm not clear what it's about. I feel like it might be more accurately called Cops Are Dicks. But Reality Sandwich wouldn't go there. And they were just like, no, we don't want to piss off the Black Lives Matter people. It doesn't matter how valid these points are. I'm a white man. A lot of, the spiritual community and the entheogenic community is white and male, and we're already under too much of an attack in this conversation. And then right after the election, when there was like this immediate dividing of the population into people with vaginas and people without, and all of a sudden we needed a women's march, even though we didn't know what the policies were going to be. We didn't know if there were going to be specific attacks on women or whatnot. And then all of a sudden you have all these resources going into flying to Washington and making these plans when nothing had happened. It was all conceptual. So I had pitched an article to coincide with the Women's March, talking about how this was super divisive and this wasn't an intelligent means of dealing with the issues that we were facing as a unified nation. And part of it also included, I've taken issue with the "Future is Female" slogan. Randy, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like a very trendy shirt here in LA that a lot of the girls wear. The future is female. And I pitched this story actually beyond Reality Sandwich, and no one will frickin' touch it, how the future isn't female, the future is integrated. And how it's really irresponsible to say that, because men have minds and eyes and little boys have minds and eyes. And when a little boy sees his mother wearing a shirt that says the future is female, then he will spin out into some sort of existential crisis if we're talking about a future that doesn't include him.
This actually relates really well to an argument Randy got into on Facebook today. He gets into one every day.
Of course.
Right.
But today's was actually a very sort of remote and esoteric and metaphysical version of what you just described that he got into with somebody. You know what I mean? So,
besides the fact that to say the future is female is beyond retarded because it's referencing actual like physical expressions of gender. It's like an attempt to speak to this return of the divine feminine, but the problem is it's really reductive and no one knows what that means, or the people who are creating these slogans don't know what that means. If we want to say the future is feminine, well, that's also not true. The future is integrated. We do need a resurgence of feminine energy in harmony with, right use of masculine energy.
Of course.
So these were stories that Reality Sandwich just were like, no, we want nothing to do with these. And the future is female, what I've pitched a bunch of, Vice won't touch it, The Atlantic, like no one will touch it. And these ideas are so out there. And what's frustrating is not just that there's no space for these articles and these ideas, but then there's the leap to like, that I'm a racist or I'm like hate women or it's just so, and I get it because those who are operating on that level of consciousness don't understand, and they, they're not yet at a place to understand. But it's really frustrating. And this is, and another part of the reason why like I'm annoyed with being a journalist, which is, it's like, does that even exist anymore? It's like, I'm tired of trying to convince people to wake up.
You've been awake for, like in our community, there's lots of people who've been awake for a long time, but most people in the community, I'd say their major wake up started around the 9/11 time. And I think yours started a little ahead of that, because of your experience at CNN and what you started to do. So you've been in this area, you've been in this sort of awakening community, or you were probably a founding member. You know what I mean? So yeah. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted, I mean, yes, that's true. Like when 9/11 happened, there wasn't a part of me that was like, you know, go USA. Like it didn't kick in this patriotism. It was just like, oh God, this is a disaster. And then really, you know, disturbing to see how people were responding in the same way that, and Emily, you and I have talked about that after the election. It was like shocking to see like, oh, we're still really this asleep. Like people still really don't get it. And that's what's so frustrating. My experience as a journalist is like, you know, being in close circles with people who are editors for the LA Weekly, for the Los Angeles Times, for the Washington Post, and realizing that they don't understand how the world works.
Yeah.
And they're not
Let me ask you this, Dani. Is it so much that they don't understand the way the world works, or that in the background of journalism, there's a code and there's an agenda and there is a staged rollout of the agenda? I know that sounds uber conspiratorial, and it's far more complex than that, but there seems to me to be within media a consensus on what is or is not at any given time the agenda of what's going to be promoted, who's going to be promoted, what the message is, and how that's contoured. And because you have this staged paradigm left-right thing, it varies between the different organs, but essentially it balances somewhere back in the middle of the agenda so that there is a controlled opposition at all times. Is that the sense you get?
It isn't the sense I get, because the people that I'm dealing with who are in relatively high editorial positions, I don't think that they understand the larger agenda and things being staged. I really think that they think they're doing the good work. But I also do think that they've forgotten that journalism has to be objective and has to present both sides. And that's recently because I've seen such a shift in how NPR has been reporting and New York Times has been reporting. And I want to be like, I've pulled my attention away from mainstream journalism for years because it frustrates me, it pisses me off, it's all lies, and I don't have the constitution to like hold that and not be angry all the time.
Yeah, most people do not want to be within 20 feet of me where a broadcast is being aired in a room.
Right, I'm the same. Like I will flip out. Right.
Yeah, but me too.
But I've paid attention a little bit in the past, you know, since the election, because it's so up. And I've asked other journalists, you know, what they think of such slanted reporting, and they do feel this like, well, we have to, you know, like this is what we have to do right now. But I don't think they understand that it's staged. I don't think they understand that world events are staged. And there is that really weird unwillingness to look at the absolute facts. Like anyone I've ever talked to about Pizzagate will immediately say there's no evidence. And I'm like, have you looked for evidence? Have you done any research? Like, have you done your due diligence as a journalist to come to the conclusion that there's no evidence? And then I'll just get like a bunch of rigmarole. And I don't know if that's like some weird self-protective mechanism of not being willing to look at something that is necessarily going to shatter their worldview. I don't know if they're under mind control. I don't know if they're morons. I don't know if they're shitty journalists. I don't know, but it's maddening.
I think so. I think it's some of all of that stuff. So I think we're in a situation where everything is staged. There is all this controlled opposition, but the way that they're able to make it work so well is I think they intentionally select people for certain kinds of positions who aren't necessarily wired the way you or I or Randy is. And so they sort of don't get it. They're hard workers and they're good at communicating with people and developing relationships and whatever. So they're doing what they think is right. And then there's someone like you, and you like, you know, clearly no matter how good of a writer you are, no matter how talented you are at what you're doing, you always have to be pushed off and contained because you can see whatever these others
the point
can't.
That I see in a lot of this is really we're in this relationship thing where nobody really wants to be offensive anymore. Whereas good activist journalists were essentially offensive on some level, you know, and it maybe a little overarching But Hunter S. Thompson was one of my earliest heroes in journalism because
Mm-hmm.
Hunter S. Thompson was offensive. At least back in the time when
Yeah,
he was doing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he was
Totally.
writing for Rolling Stone magazine, which is my gestation period. And
so
realizing that at that point in time, for that brief window, there was a type of journalism that went against the grain of the system with so much fury that, I mean, my God, they made a movie about it with Bill Murray, which was not the greatest movie, but the point being that there was that moment when journalism got its ferocity back, when it grew a set of balls again and did something meaningful, bringing down a United States president. And we haven't seen that. Everybody became civilized again and neutered. It was like everybody went to J school and got taught all the rules. And when I saw what happened to journalism after the 1970s, I went, really glad I didn't make that career choice, because that's not what I would have wanted to do. I published underground newspapers in high school. I got confiscated, thrown out of school, banned, barred. I mean, I was a journalism student in high school. I was scrolling, yeah, I always say that wrong. Scrolling Quill Society for 3 years. I edited newspapers, I edited a yearbook. And in that time, my goal was basically to go to Columbia and be a journalist. And when I saw what journalism became, when it was this gigantic social drive to change the world, and I went, no, that's not what journalism is. Journalism is reportage. And so we're kind of in this place now where basically 2 generations have grown up, civilized, and about the relationship of communication rather than the raw communication, which is, you know what, we need to talk about this shit. We need to get real.
Exactly. And that's what's so frustrating now, is that there's this manufactured us-them divide that has journalists taking pride in writing with an agenda and writing to fuel an agenda, even though it's totally anathema to journalism. That isn't what journalism is. And there's this, fake war of information going on, when you're right. Like, we need to just, our allegiance is to the truth. Hunter is the reason why I went into journalism, and that, that passion and that fury is what drives me. And at this point, it scares people and they don't want to deal with it. It's really frustrating because democracy does not work without a free press, and democracy is dead. We know that. The press is dead. I wish we could just set it on fire and start the new, instead of going through the sham that it's still relevant, and B, that we can fix it. It's dead and gone, and it's a bummer for me.
It is dead and gone. In one sense it is, although it's still a functionally ambulant corpse at this point. However, what's replacing it, or what we think is replacing it, to me is starting to look as scary as what is being replaced, and that is the so-called alternative media, which, I've been doing this on the internet since 2003. And in that time, I had a lot of hopes for this, and now I'm seeing how it's all going down, and how we really, all we're doing is we're getting more and more gentrified and civilized in this, too, to the point where, well, let's face it, I like to piss in people's pockets. So I'm not really liked by people like the mainstream type alternative media hosts and guests, because of the fact that I'm kind of brutal and honest.
Right.
And so alternative media had the potential, the internet had the potential to destabilize the empire. What do you see from your perspective as the open window to still be able to do that in a decentralized way and operating independently?
Look, anything can happen. So I don't want to poo-poo that lovely vision that could happen. But the way that I see it, it's oversaturated. And to get anyone's attention is so exhausting. And you have you know, however many thousands of people you know, millions vying for people's attention and ear. And a lot of what they're saying is nonsense. And for whatever reason, people are drawn to nonsense, and it just feels inefficient, which is why for me, and this is not, I don't think this is a sane plan, but I'm going for television. And you know, I wrote a book based on a cover story I wrote for the LA Weekly, and I've spent the past 2 years turning that into a television, because I do feel like going through the established channels is the most efficient way. So I think for me to have a mainstream television series where I can reach millions of people is going to be the most effective way to wake people up, versus, you know, a couple hundred people read this blog, a couple thousand people see this YouTube video. It just doesn't feel very efficient to me. And for me, I end up preaching to the choir a lot of the time. So I don't think it's impossible. I have not cracked the like independent internet code, and I'm expending a lot of energy trying, and I have yet to really nail it, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Agreed.
So that was, I liked that you guys brought up Hunter Thompson, Randy, because when many years back, when Dani and I became friends on Facebook through like gymnastics people we knew in common, like when I hit on her thing and I read her about section, she had a whole thing in there about Hunter S. Thompson. I was like, yeah, she's cool. I'll send her. So that was perfect that you guys had that little there. Okay, so
It was code for she's down.
It was code for she's down. So before we get on to other stuff like moving forward, the last thing I wanted to hit on was kind of your, like me in that we both essentially come from the left. A lot of people who listen to our show back when they still did the political thing maybe came a little bit more from the center or from the right. And so, you know, for you, for some people like you and I, it is very odd to find ourselves in this situation where neither of us actually believe in the government. We both are just interested in the truth, but somehow we are both Nazis and founding members of the alt-right.
Right. Totally.
Can you talk a little about that? That was sort of how, through that mess of the election with all of this, like everyone's a Nazi and a racist if they voted for Trump, or if you don't vote at all, that also makes you a Nazi and a racist and whatever. Can you talk a little bit about like how nuts and insane that was? And particularly on your, some of your posts on Facebook, I couldn't believe how many people were actually being quite brutal to you. You weren't even saying anything that was that controversial, in my opinion. You were just like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. You know, like, can you talk a little about that? What that sort of is like to sort of be by others, not, like displaced from your own community, and then assigned to a community that you also have nothing in common with.
Totally. I'm used to being projected upon. I'm used to that, and I'm used to, it doesn't matter. And it hurts every time. And also, like, it's a great thing about having a mission and being aligned with truth. We're like, it doesn't matter. You know, just like move forward. But unfortunately, we're living in a time where critical, independent thinking is being completely demonized. And it's this, either you're with us or you're against us, versus like, okay, well, how about if I take the truth, a little bit of truth from here and a little bit of truth from there, and I make up my own mind, and that way of being is completely not acceptable. Like, after the guy in office was elected, and I didn't vote for him, and I didn't think that was a wonderful thing. I didn't lambast my friends who voted for him. I reached out and said, hey, let's get together and explain to me why this is a good thing, why you want this, like break it down for me. And that type of investigative reasoning is another thing that we're kind of not allowed in this culture. And it's part of, you know, the Vedas called it the Kali Yuga. We're living in a time where truth is lies and lies is truth. But it's really frustrating. It's frustrating. I don't actually even care about being misunderstood, but it's frustrating to me how close-minded a lot of people are, and how they're so hyper-identified with this very kindergarten reductive, right, wrong, good, bad, Trump is evil, Hillary's an angel. It's like, you know, it's ridiculous. And it's frustrating to me, the Pizzagate thing, and the fact that we lost, the First Amendment over it, in that no one will look at it because Democrats are involved. And I do see that in, I was telling Emily, I went to a gathering a couple weeks ago with a lot of old LA Weekly writers who now are working for a bunch of the big newspapers and the big magazines, and how their allegiance is to the left. It isn't to the truth. And so many things that happen historically get rewritten so as to make the left look more innocent or look infallible. And, the truth is that there's good and bad to everything. And it's been really disappointing in me since the election, just to see, I don't want to insult my Facebook friends, but just how much contraction there is and how much intolerance there is. And, one of the first things that I'd posted after the election was there was all this name calling, calling Trump names and calling the people who voted for him names. And I was like, whoa, like that's hate speech too. And then that's when I was called a racist, because I was defending this. And it's this separation consciousness and this illusion of divisiveness, and not taking responsibility for the fact that, like, we're in this position as Americans because we all dropped the ball on democracy. All of us. We are too comfortable, too apathetic, too distracted to have made any moves to revolutionize or make change, so that this would never happen. And everyone wants to do the, like, we're good, they're bad, I'm a victim, they're a perpetrator. And that game is just so old and dead, boring, and dysfunctional, and at this point really dangerous, and really threatening the survival of the species. And I'm speaking to a level of consciousness that I understand, like, and it is what it is, but, like, we can only understand the level of consciousness where we're at. And Claire Graves, he talks about in Spiral Dynamics the different levels of consciousness, and everyone goes through the same ones in the same order. No one skips any. And unless you make it to, like, a second tier consciousness, you're not going to understand that we're a unified whole. And so I get people are where they are, and I guess that's perfect, because there's no point at being in odds with reality. It is what it is. But it's sad watching the species fuck it up. Yeah.
So it's like, in other words, some people, and this is, I completely understand this. I think about this too. There's a lot of people who, for their consciousness to develop to where it needs to be, they're going to have to live through censorship and loss of freedom in order to raise their consciousness. And it's unfortunate for some of us whose consciousness is at this other level, because we're sitting here watching going, stop it, you can stop it right now. And and unfortunately, because we're outnumbered, that means on a certain level, I mean, freedom is something attained actually in your own mind, but on a certain level, it feels like we're having to live through those losses with them, because, we're part of a
unified. We are. Like, I have to go through metal detectors at the Hollywood Bowl now, the same as people who want the metal detectors at the Hollywood Bowl. I don't want to live in a police state.
I want you to tell people about your phone call to the Hollywood Bowl. Tell them what happened, and then why you called the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah, so I went to a concert at the Hollywood Bowl, and there were suddenly metal detectors, and I needed to hand over my purse and have them look through it. And this is the type of thing that I'm an Aquarius, like, I don't do well with. It makes me really uncomfortable. I'm not into it at all. And so I questioned all of the guards about it, and it was clear, like, no one knew what they were talking about, what they were looking for, why they were there. So I called the Hollywood Bowl, and I, was transferred to a bunch of different people and asked why they were doing this. And they said, I said, have there been threats? Have there been incidences? Like, what inspired you to institute this program? And they cited the Ariana Grande concert in the UK. And then, of course, and Emily, you and I talked about this, I'm like, okay, so there was this false flag thing that enabled, whoever could profit off of this to all of a sudden require every arena in the frickin' Western world to hire these people and go through these scams. And, I just said, well, I would like you to log my request as a longtime Hollywood Bowl customer to get rid of them. I'm not into these at all. And she said, that's never going to happen. in our lifetime, we're going to have these forever. And it just, stuff like that gets very disheartening to me because it's all such bad theater. It's not even real. And I don't like the direction it's going. It really bothers me as someone who's devoted to freedom and sovereignty.
Absolutely. And didn't you pitch a story about that to the LA Times, which promptly got rejected?
Yeah. I mean, my stories are just like so not really landing these days.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's like the shock of their day when someone actually pitches that as a story like that to them. So in some ways, I think it's worth still doing it just so that they have to, like, at least for that 1 second that they're looking at your words on the paper, have to like be confronted with some form of reality.
Where really was the media outcry against loss of privacy, against freedom of movement, freedom to travel? I mean, I'm looking at, I got to take a flight out of here to Houston on Friday morning. I am so not looking forward to going through TSA because I am really an asshole when people get on my shit, which
I'm the same.
They're going to go through my knapsack. The last time I went through TSA in Boston, they took a tool out of my bag and said it was a weapon. Like, not a weapon, you know, but it's silly. And I looked at the TSA person and I said, how do you do this day after day? But she just looked at me. She was clueless. But the media itself has never posed the question on the broad scale of what we've given up in terms of all the pretexting that has gone on since 9/11. I mean, we got to 9/11 and then pretty much in rapid succession, we had the shoe bomber guy, which meant now we had to take our shoes off. And then we had something else, who knows what, some guy with liquids. So now we can't carry bottles of water. We can't take a, you know.
The only problem is that guy, the underwear bomber guy, that was bullshit.
The underwear bomber guy.
But it's all a racket.
Yeah.
It's not real. But I agree. Like, where's the outrage? Like, why is no one, now there's TSA on the metro. Why are we not rioting about this? Like, this is something to protest.
Because the reason we're not rioting is because George Soros isn't going to fund that riot. Right? If it's not a racially divisive or a, you know, class divisive riot, it's not going to fund that one.
There's no op-ed pieces on this. There's no
of course not,
alternative narrative on NPR.
Yeah.
No, I like right after the whole Twitter censoring and when they pulled the fake news accounts, I reached out to all my journalist friends, like, what do you think about this? And they completely defended it. And I said, have you checked out the list of sites? Have you looked into these yourself to determine whether they're fake news? Zero. None of them have. I don't get it.
Well, and then who gets to define what fake news is? I mean, come on.
Right.
Let's go back.
It's such a slippery slope. Like, aren't we terrified?
How far back do you want to go? Should we go back to 1963 in the Kennedy assassination? Shall we go to Watergate? Shall we go to Kent State? I mean, where do you want to go for fake news? Because none of this stuff was ever covered with an even hand. Maybe once upon a time, Rolling Stone magazine with Kent State, maybe. But other than that, we've not really seen effective alternative journalism in this country for 50 freaking years. Not since the East Village Other, Bowert's newspaper. We have not seen anybody who has acted in activism. And we don't see it now because it's completely locked down, which is why somebody like me goes, well, there must be an agenda here. And I get what you're telling me about the fact that, no, these are good people. They mean well, but they're protecting a status quo. And
like they are, but it's unconscious.
But look at the reward. Look at the reward when your underground media friends are suddenly going mainstream. They built their cred and their resume. They didn't make waves. And as a result of that, they get to bump up. So I'm kind of challenging the narrative and saying, maybe there's not a conspiracy. Maybe it's just understood that there's places.
I think they're asleep. I don't think they get it. I really don't think they get how it works. I think there's some weird slumber that takes over. Maybe it is for the byline and the popularity or the paycheck or those things, but I don't think they get it, which is what I don't get.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
Dani, do you know who Walter Board is?
No.
Walter Board, he started the East Village Other, which is like the first of the LA Weekly type of newspapers. He also wrote a fascinating book that I highly recommend that you and everyone listening read, called Operation Mind Control. And yeah, it's difficult to find, but I have it on PDF, so I'll
it's on the internet. You can download it, actually.
Yeah, you can download the full version. Like there's
the
a couple
foreword
versions.
to it was written by the original author of The Manchurian Candidate.
Ooh.
So,
well, one thing, I mean, I think that as far as like, you know, for what you're saying, Randy, like, are they part of this larger agenda? And what I'm saying, where I think they don't know, Emily and I have talked about, like, you know, Emily, your efforts to get your father to see your point of view on a lot of things. And Randy, I'm sure you've had this experience, and I know I've had it a million times, and you just hit this wall of willful ignorance. And there's like a fire to the defending of the ignorance and the lack of knowledge. And I really think it has to do with how disempowered we are and how we don't know ourselves as sovereign beings, and really not being resourced enough emotionally or psychologically to handle the truth of the matter, that the powers that be are nefarious fuckwads who don't have our best interests in mind. So I think the psyche just doubles up on its maniacal and insane efforts to protect, you know, this dead narrative. And that creates these behaviors that are frustrating and seem stupid and aren't, you know, they're not aligned with the intelligence that I know a lot of these people hold. But I do think they can't handle what it would mean for their entire worldview to be shattered.
I guess what I'm effectively saying, though, isn't so much, it's like we all got together in the upper room and we plotted this conspiracy and we crafted this narrative and now we're going to enforce it. It is more this docility, this sense of maintaining a comfortable narrative, of not putting yourself in harm's way. Because a good reporter who does their job, and specifically in political and crime reporters, at some point bump up against stories they know is going to cost them something. I know some of these guys. I know journalists here in the state capital of Pennsylvania. And I know what was going on in the background a decade before the Jerry Sandusky Penn State scandal blew up, of how the FBI field office in Harrisburg was well aware of child trafficking going in and out of Penn State, and how they knew that certain high-level officials at Penn State were trading off little boys for favors with high rollers that were coming in as supporters for the football team. I'm comfortable saying this because I was given information that I reported to the FBI, and quite frankly, they had no interest in it at all. And there were reporters and journalists who knew a lot of this stuff, but they know why they were terrified, because of the level of power of the people who control this system, which is actually the forerunner of Pizzagate.
So you're saying that these journalist friends of yours who have this information, it's a matter of cowardice?
No, it was a matter of there was no place to go with it. They would have been suppressed.
Right.
These are good people.
And you know, in the background, it's interesting because, you know, you brought up Pizzagate, and this whole censorship thing is really, just like all of the mess that we're in, is really related to pedophilia. Pedophilia is the currency that makes this, you know, world happen. And all of these people who are, you know, in positions that don't allow the truth, part of the reason they're in that position is because they're blackmailed with, if it isn't something related to pedophilia, it's something related to a gay affair or some shady business dealings.
Yep.
Anybody in any kind of like central position of power or position to make things happen, they've got something on them, or someone, something related to that. Pedophilia being, I mean, it is obvious that pedophilia is the one they really care about, because we've known about some of these other things for a long time, but as soon as there started to be any attention paid to the pedophilia and whatnot, that's when all the news became fake and the censorship became a thing. You know, that is the that's the big secret. And I think to the point that, you know, our family and our parents and some of our friends who are very intelligent, I agree with you that I think they have built a life upon a truth that they thought was, and the idea that isn't. I feel like they don't have, you're right, they don't have the psychological makeup or the stomach to deal with it. Also, I think there's this part of them that would feel like, well, if all my experiences were built on a foundation that doesn't matter, then like the experiences don't matter. And that isn't the truth. You know what I mean? Like all of the things that we've been through bring us to the point where we are right now. And that point is where it's time to wake up. And so all of those were very meaningful experiences for the purpose of waking up.
Absolutely. But it takes a lot of work to get there. Right. And we all know how much work it takes to hold this level of truth and to be emotionally mature enough and expansive enough and stable enough to hold this level of truth. And I do have compassion for the people who have families and mortgages and day jobs. And I get that there, you know, a lot of that would come crashing down if they were to avail themselves. But unfortunately,
that's what has to happen.
Yeah, it has to happen because it's getting so messy. And the direction it's going, it's a little freaky.
For sure.
Well, I think you see what happened with journalists who did that. Look at Breitbart, look at Michael Hastings. These are guys that...
Gary Webb.
Webb. See how close they got to the central nervous system of this beast.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I think this is a good time to take a break. When we get back, we're going to get into what Dani's doing now. But for now, over the break, we're going to take a look at some of her really cool artwork. All right.
Think about the word block. There's a density to it, a heaviness, there's an angular quality. A block, it's like an obstruction. It's something that stands between things, between ourselves and our desires, achievements, destiny, dharma, what have you. What if this resistance is part of the evolutionary process? What if it isn't a block to the evolutionary process? What if it isn't a block to growth? Rather, it is part of the awakening process to be embraced and to be incorporated. Sure, I could name it a block and then choose to be stuck there and choose to create this big giant obstacle that I cannot see around and stay in this place of lack of clarity. Stronger would be to say, I'm navigating some murkiness in my process. I'm still inviting. In labeling something a block, there's this static nature, and then there's this sort of permanence, like we're putting a pin in the resistance or the contraction or the lack of clarity. And feel into words a little bit differently and understand how they are programming our subconscious and how we are sometimes sabotaging ourselves. Remember, every word matters. You are amazing. Have a rockin' day. Mwah!
Welcome back to the second half of Off Planet Radio, Off Planet TV. Our website is offplanetradio.com. Getting ready to launch some new platforms. I know we keep saying this. It takes us like forever to do this, but we are getting there. And so we're really excited about that because that's going to open up some new avenues for us. And come to think of it, our guest is doing Patreon as well. Emily, what do we got going on?
All right. So we're back, and you guys over the break got a chance to look at some of Dani's art. Dani, why don't you tell everybody who the sassy, smartass little girl is, how you came up with her, and what you're doing with that?
Well, I guess the sassy, smartest little girl is me because I'm an artistic narcissist.
But her name is Sadie, right?
Yeah, her name is Sadie. The art started, the backstory is that I had been pitching the LA Weekly for years, and the same editor was like, yeah, you're a lovely writer, but do you read our paper? Like, what the hell are these pitches? And he just kept rejecting me. And then one year I was at my mom's and she had an Oscar party, and I really don't care about the Oscars or anything. And so I just grabbed some brown paper grocery bags from the kitchen and like a grease pencil and started drawing all of the actors. And they were just like torn pieces of paper bags. And the next morning I was like, I think the LA Weekly should run these instead of like the dumb, like fancy press photographs that every other newspaper is going to run. So I physically went there and like demanded to see the editor and handed him this pile of paper bag shredded pieces, and they actually ran them, and that was sort of my in. And so then when I started writing for the LA Weekly, he encouraged me to illustrate my drawings, and I'd never considered myself an illustrator, and it just kind of like stuck. Then in 2012, when the Mayan calendar ended, out of nowhere, I decided I needed to do a calendar. And so from that, I created the I Am calendar, and it featured, I made up all new holidays. So it was all visionaries like John Lennon and Martin Luther King and Joan of Arc and Hypatia. And, you know, I made their birthdays holidays, and it featured moon cycles and Mercury retrogrades. And then each page had like a bazillion little, like inspirational illustrations and bits of encouragement and little exercises to like expand our emotional intelligence or, you know, learn a new communication tool. And that developed a pretty ferocious cult following. And then from there, it just kind of all unfolded at warp speed. And all of a sudden, all this content wanted to come out of me. And I started doing these daily illustrations that I post on Instagram now. And I draw all of the full moons and the new moons and important, you know, sort of noteworthy astrological transits and quotes. And I do animations called planetary service announcements. I turned the calendar into a book called Yes, I Am. It's a transformational coloring book. And I have a bunch of products, and all of a sudden I'm this sort of accidental illustrator.
You know, it hits me though, that in a way what you did was you found your entree to do something that actually is meaningful journalism. And when you were talking about this, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, who's made a difference? And I'm thinking, Gary Trudeau, Burke Breathitt. I mean, these are people who get their message out there in a graphic manner. They're far less subject to censorship and suppression and criticism, largely because of the way that they launched this into the world of cartoon animation. And I mean, your cartoons carry a subtext to them. People who follow your graphics for any period of time, the personality begins to develop, the language, the sense of dynamicism that you impart into all that. And I'm thinking, this is actually maybe the best form of journalism now, is to go with something like this rather than the hardcore textual-based photojournalism, rants and things like that.
I appreciate that, Randy. Thank you. And I feel the same. I feel like I can be more subversive, and there's such an innocence, and, you know, they're so cute that it's easier for me to sneak some things in under the surface. And when I started, you know, my writing has developed a lot over the years, but one of the criticisms that I used to get a lot was that I didn't come off as very vulnerable, and my voice is very edgy and could be very harsh. And so with my articles, the characters, they would be sort of like the emotional heart that would soften the pieces. And
The other thing is, you know, what Randy was saying, it is a great way to get truth and more hardcore journalism out there, and something like that. My father rejects when we talk about, if I ever talk about conspiracies or any political stuff, he rejects it. But I know he's listening, and I know he's actually in some small way taking it in, because he'll show me, he loves to show me cartoons, and he shows me cartoons that are talking about it, and he thinks it's so funny, and he's very proud of it, and he's proud that he recognized, he knows what this is. You know, he wouldn't know what they were talking about if he hadn't actually listened to what I was saying. So he finds all great. So it's a good way for us to communicate, and for him to let me know that he hears what I'm saying, even though he doesn't want to give me any ground on that. And also he likes the cartoons, and some of the cartoons actually get it pretty much dead on, you know?
Yeah. You know, I think they're more accessible. My writing can be pretty like didactic and heady. And the cartoons, they're so easily embraced by the masses. And so for like the calendar, each page each month would feature like 20 to 30 little drawings, and some of them were very simple and very one-dimensional, and it allowed me to sneak in, you know, things about like breaking down what government means and breaking down currency, and it's easier for me to slide it in because the aesthetic is kind of like the sugar, and then I can get the medicine in there.
She is so cute, and especially when you have her doing some like dance moves and stuff like that, you get it in just like the perfectly right sassy position or angle that I'm like, and it's obviously because I know you, I know it's you. It's so, I love it. Like it's very, everybody loves them too. Everyone thinks they're adorable and meaningful, and that's kind of.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. I was always really self-conscious of my smile because it's like so big and overtakes my whole face. So it made for a good cartoon character and like helped me make peace with it because it gives her such like a notable quality. Yeah. she's very sad. Like, I don't know. I love her sassiness, and she's lots of fun, just like the person she's modeled after.
Exactly.
So can you tell people where they can tell people about because people see the cartoons on our Facebook pages and whatnot, but can you let people know about where they can find your coloring book and calendar, and also about the product line that you have on Society 6?
Yes. So you can link through to everything through my DaniKatz.com website. It's really well organized there. I post most days, I know you said that, Emily, on Facebook, but I actually do post daily on Instagram. So the best place to follow me is on Instagram, and my handle is something.Dani. And then I did just launch the Patreon campaign, which is at Patreon /Dani Katz. And what's cool about that is I'm creating all sorts of patron only exclusive content. And I'm doing, you know, like I can't really post my writing on Instagram, and I can post it on my blog. I do have a blog, which you can also click through from my Dani Katz site. But there's something, it just feels so far removed. And there's just something about the blog platform that didn't inspire me to do a lot of writing, but there's something about Patreon that has me actually inspired to give some really cool content. So I've already posted some essays there that I haven't printed before. I have so much content. I have so many essays and articles that just never found a home. So I'm going to be putting those up on Patreon. And I do have this series of planetary service announcements on my YouTube channel, which is also, you can, I don't want to keep saying all the names, but you can click through on my Dani Katz site. And so I'm making more of those, and those are all, you know, just ways to be a better planetary citizen and have more fun doing it, and some languaging tips. And then I turned the calendar into a book called Yes, I Am, and that is for sale on Amazon. And you can also click through my site to find it. It's, the book features all of the content that was in the calendar. So it's 444 pages. It's like it's so thick and big. And it's one of those things, like, it's a great gift. It makes people smile. It's a good like toilet read. And
didn't you just donate a bunch of them to the Children's Hospital?
That's this like amazing man I met at actually that craft fair that you came to visit me at in Silver Lake. He works at a nurses staffing agency, and he fell in love with the book and jumped through a million hoops to get this approval from LA Children's Hospital. And then we put together an event and an auction, raised $2,500 to buy books to donate to LA Children's Hospital, which was super rad and just like totally exceeded my hopes for the book and what would happen with it. And it's only been out for a year, so it's early days. That was an exciting win.
Cool. And then tell people about like you have some really cool stuff on Society 6. Like you have awesome leggings and towels and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of products on Society 6. I think my best-selling one is still Namaste the Fuck Away, which was a t-shirt I made from, I used to go to ecstatic dance when I lived in New Mexico, and one of the rules is that you're not allowed to talk, but a lot of guys use ecstatic dance as like an excuse to like rub up on you and get all up in your face. And after being on the receiving end of this sort of like aggression, like lingam rubbing, I just made this shirt for myself so that I could point to it. And I have a ton of products like tote bags and mugs featuring, you know, our little cutie pie, and the leggings are pretty awesome. they're super fun. They're like badass leggings, and there's a must get fucking enlightened pair with like a girl like gritting her teeth in meditation. And yeah, they're fun. It's fun. My drawings, because I do tend to do just use black ink, and they look really, really clean and really poppy and really graphic. And so all that stuff is on Society 6, and I like it because a lot of the stuff is made like it's sort of out there, but like I pray when I do my drawings, and I do these intentions, and so like I have mugs that are my Society 6 drawings, and I like knowing that like my tea is in this intentional mug that was made with all these blessings, and that's sort of the paradigm that I'm playing in, and so it informs the products.
And super cool. And also I encourage people to subscribe to Dani, on Patreon. Randy and I became the first patrons when she started.
Thank you.
The first time in my life I was the first of anything, and it's actually so good that I think I might increase our donation. But everybody check it out. You put out stuff almost every day. Like I get emails almost every day from you on there. So she's not one of those people who puts out 2 things a month and then is like donate. So yeah, check it out. All right, so we're going to get into next, like kind of where you're turning much of your focus to now, which is this quantum languaging. Can you tell everybody what that is, what you are doing, why you are doing it, and how it goes, man?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been working on for about 10 years. And I've been studying the energetic frequencies of words, and how the basic operating principle is that words are the fundamental building block of our entire known reality, right? They shape how we think, how we self-identify, how we organize information through our brains, how we present ourselves, all of these things. And so quantum language is a study of words beyond mere intellectual connotation, to study their energetic frequencies, because every word has its own unique vibrational frequency, and then how those frequencies affect the psyche, the energetic body, the emotional body, and then how to communicate, integrating all of this in the most effective way. And so I just wrote a book about this, which has been a few years in the making. I just finished it. It's hitting the stands November 1st, published by Emergence Press out of Pennsylvania. And I'm super excited. The book turned out better than I thought it would. And my highest hopes are for it to spark a revolution. And I know that that word in itself is laden with some issues. And as shorthand, my perspective on it is that given that language is the fundamental building block of our reality, and this language has created this paradigm, it's a paradigm of limitation and divisiveness and scarcity and competition, and all those frequencies are embedded in our languaging. And so while it's a lovely idea to reform the judicial system or to, switch around XYZ system, until we actually evolve the language, everything that we create from that language is going to be infected with the frequencies of divisiveness, limitation, lack, competition, et cetera, et cetera. So this is hitting it at a fundamental level. Did that make sense?
That was perfect. That was perfect. Interesting. You referenced the judicial system, which many people still haven't figured out that that's really all about language as well. The people who do that understand the frequency. I have a question separate from that. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but it came up one time with another guest. So this is just an example. Do you think that, so one of the words that was force-fed to us, like nonstop for a couple of years, it's now been replaced by like Russia and a few other things, was the word ISIS. And one of the things I noticed really early on when they were talking about ISIS was that like, it did something to my head. Like when I heard the word, when I said the word, and like, particularly the way some people say it, like emphasize it in a certain way. Like I noticed that it did, that was one of the words where I noticed there, like something going on with the vibration in my mouth affected like how I thought about something. And I think I've spoken with someone about how, do you think part of the reason that they chose to call it ISIS was because they knew at this point, like there was a lot of people focusing on or thinking about or talking about like a return of divine feminine, which could be related to the goddess Isis, right? And they want to retard that by attaching this idea of cutting people's heads off and all this crazy stuff with Isis. And they also understood that the vibration of that word would do something to cement that idea in people's head. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
it does. It does. And I absolutely think that that's part of it. I haven't myself dove into the study of Isis and why they chose this word and why they chose to malign it. But as you're speaking about this, and you have mentioned this before, I absolutely think that that's why they chose it.
Yeah. Okay. So that is an example of how the frequency of the word is sort of, that's a little different example than what you generally get into with this, which we're gonna go there now. But I just wanted to ask you about that, since you're the language frequency.
I mean,
expert.
similar to you in the way that, like, when you say the word, you're attuning to how it's feeling inside of you. So I can feel the sort of geometric alignment of the words, and that kicked in for me about 10 years ago. A lot of synchronicities and sort of injury kicked in this ability. And so when I'm playing with this work and I'm playing with the words, I'm feeling in my body for the alignment, for the sort of like sacred geometry that like clicks it into a higher vibe. And I mean, the thing is that language creates culture. Every society is absolutely contained within its language. So just the fact that like there's no word in our culture for the adjective version of integrity. Like, that actually doesn't exist at all. Or there's no way to say the word unlimited or limitless without saying the word limit, which necessarily anchors the word and the concept in the vibrational frequency of limitation and tethers us to it.
So that's super interesting what you said about integrity. And I remember when you posted about that, and I thought, you're right, it doesn't. In order to imply what you're trying to imply, you have to say something like act with integrity, which then also forces you to use the word act, which makes it seem like you're just pretending about something, like it's not something real, right?
Right,
so,
we're not allowed to embody it.
Right.
We have to keep it separate from us.
Yeah. So in order to use the word integrity that way, you have to nullify it by saying you're pretending, because integrity is being real, and then you have to attach it to pretending. So you're basically nullifying the point of using that word. So is that the kind of thing you're talking about there?
It's an element. I mean, there are so many pieces to it. So that is absolutely an element. And a piece of quantum languaging is creating new words. Like I created the word omniscopic to replace limitless or unlimited. It's a way of speaking about every possibility that ever was, is, or will be without needing to tether ourselves to the frequency of limitation. And I'm encouraging people to like, let's make up words for all of these missing words. It's a tiny piece of it. The other piece is attuning to our habitual languaging patterns. Like, you know, the subconscious mind is responsible for 95% of our experience and our behavior. And that's programmed first and foremost through language and repetition. So the words that we use all day, every day are programming our subconscious, programming our belief systems, and that in turn is what's creating our experiences and magnetizing our experiences. And so it's attuning ourselves to our unconscious languaging patterns, which are really just habits, and learning to listen to ourselves and see where we're sabotaging ourselves, see where we're sabotaging our relationships, and then rewriting our languaging patterns for the more functional, efficient, effective, inclusive, empowered, and delightful.
Yeah, wow. You had a really good post about an observation you made on a walk in Echo Park a few weeks back, and the language that was used and something you observed. I think that maybe that's a good example for you to explain to people what you're talking about here.
Yeah. So I was taking a walk in Echo Park on a lovely, beautiful summer day, and I came across this cafe that had a sign painted on the wall that said "Resist Hate." And I want to be clear. I understand that whoever painted the sign thought they were doing a good thing. I'm sure they thought this was an altruistic act, but hate was nowhere in my field of consciousness. I was enjoying my day. So all of a sudden, resist hate, you're putting hate into my field of consciousness, which means you're giving it existential validity where before it had none. And beyond that, you're advising me to resist it, when we know from reading like David Hawkins' Power versus Force that resistance is force, resistance is weak, resistance only empowers the energetics it seeks to impose. And so the other thing is about resisting hate is that if my task is to resist hate, I need hate to have a purpose. I need hate to have a mission. So it's actually a horrible message that does way more harm than good and keeps hate alive and also keeps us in that energetic of fight. And this is what I'm saying, how our language is toxic and lousy with divisiveness and confrontation and fight that really doesn't need to be there. Like what the person meant with the sign, I think, was foster peace, be peace, vibe peace, radiate peace, share peace, spread peace, right? That's an active thing that's attuning me to the vibration of what I actually want to be experiencing. We don't change it. You know, Bucky Fuller said you don't change a paradigm by fighting against the old. You create the new.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the same in our languaging. We language what we want. We language the new. We don't waste our time bitching about what we're done with.
Well, it's kind of like the bumper stickers that I see that say coexist. And I'm thinking, you know, I'd hope for better than that. That's not really a strong affirmation. Coexist.
Right, it has every religion in the world symbol attached to it. Yes.
Yeah, it's true. It's like aim higher.
Yeah. So like foster peace, or even just give love would be, you know what I mean, or spread love, or be love. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, one of the pieces of, you know, one of the quantum languaging tenets that I call them quantum languaging hacks that are in the book is like, ditch the negative space speak and talk about what you want, and stop talking and complaining about what you don't want. Because the other thing is that words establish existential validity, right? Like if something exists, it has a word. If something doesn't have a word, it doesn't exist. And in indigenous cultures, when someone was cast out of the tribe stopped using that person's name, and that made it so that they didn't exist anymore. So it's really important to not talk about these energetics that we don't want to foster.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Can you give us like an example, like in a more, so I know you do your book is about hacking the language, and you're also doing language coaching with people. Can you give us an example of something that, like, if you're working with a client or whatever, something that's come up, or an example of how you might change someone's language in relation to something that they're dealing with personally or whatnot? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So in quantum languaging sessions, we are acknowledging the disempowering languaging patterns that are working against whatever the client is claiming to want to achieve or want in their life. So it's honing in on where the communication habits are getting in the way. That's step one. Step two is then digging underneath the languaging habits to get to the belief systems that are giving them life. And then using care and compassion and a bajillion different techniques and astrology and human design and the gene keys, we go into those belief systems and very gently, with a lot of tenderness, transmute them into healthier belief systems. So one example would be, I had a client recently who was talking about, he was really down on himself for not showing up for his spiritual practice and having a lot of resistance to meditating. And he kept saying that he was blocked, and I'm so blocked, and this block and this block and this block. And I said, well, what if we just lost the word block, right? Because when we have a block, then we get to forget about the mission and all of a sudden turn our attention to the block and to healing the block and honing in on the block and why is the block here. And what if we just decide that this resistance you're feeling is part of your awakening process, is part of your meditation practice, and instead of empowering it by labeling it a block and giving it a separate identity from your meditation practice, just move through it with like, wow, I'm having a lot of resistance to my meditation practice, and still doing it, not letting it become an obstacle. So by simply removing that word from his personal lexicon, he was able to expand into the discomfort he was feeling without needing to identify with it or let it like calcify into something that it didn't have to be.
Also, a block is a actual physical thing. So once you're saying,
block.
Right? So it's actually placing a physical impediment where there is really a mental one only. So he's turning the mental thing into a physical thing as well, and therefore doubling his problem. Right?
Exactly. Creating one that doesn't even have to be there, because the reality is that the awakening path is not linear. It ebbs and flows, and sometimes we're uncomfortable, and sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it isn't. And to label it a block is to take ourselves off the path and go deal with some other distraction that doesn't actually exist.
Okay, so here, I'm going to throw one at you, and it just came to me while you were describing that. Something that we hear a lot from people in our community and people that we're in touch with, and Randy and I both use ourselves at times. Sometimes you hear a lot of talk of people feeling like they're under attack, or they're experiencing a lot of interference. We're talking about psychic kinds of things, or even sometimes electronic harassment kind of stuff. What could you do with that? Explain how you would go about that when someone is constantly using the words, I'm under attack, I'm feeling under attack, or I'm being interfered with, without, you don't want them to not be able to acknowledge what's happening. But what would be a better way to deal with that in terms of what you do?
Well, in every way that you just language that, I'm under attack, I'm being interfered with, that's all victim conscious, because we are being perpetrated upon by some outside source. And maybe that's true on some dimension of reality. That's not the dimension of reality that I'm addressing with quantum languaging. One of the main precepts of quantum languaging is to take 100% responsibility for our experience. So the gist is, to not language it as though I'm a victim. It's because that's also a story, right? I'm being fucked with, someone's interfering. Okay, what's your actual physical experience? Are you feeling constriction in your throat? Are your thoughts racing? Like, what's actually happening? So a big part of it is slowing down and getting very honest with what is your experience, not what conclusions are you drawing, not what stories are we making up based on our experience. What is my actual physical, visceral experience in the present moment? And then empowering that person and finding tools and techniques to manage that state, to shift that state. Dealing on certain levels of reality and with certain clients, I can give tools to cloak themselves, to clear themselves out. But first and foremost would be to address the victim consciousness that's informing the languaging, and to lose that entirely, because every time we speak like that, something's interfering with me, we're empowering that something right away. Right then and there, we just gave our power away.
Yeah, that was why I brought that kind of example up, because I think that's something that we all, that's something in this community that we could work on individually, but also help each other to work on. You know what I mean? So,
and even just right there, like, that's something that we can work on. So like the word work is laden with effort and have to, and a beholdenness. So that's something we can shift. That's something that we can play with. I was gonna say play with is a better one. Yeah. Play is so great.
And because it could make something that was a troublesome thing become a fun thing. And then when you're having fun, if there actually is somebody attacking you, it's no longer to the behoove. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really good.
And the big key is empowering ourselves to remember that, like, this reality really is anything we want it to be. So it really is a level of word wizardry, and learning to attune ourselves to all of these subtle nuances to rewrite our reality for the way more fun.
Absolutely. Randy, what say you?
Well, I was sitting here where you were going through that. I mean, it's one of the fundamentals of psychology that when you put negatives into a sentence, the thing which you reference becomes empowered by it. Just what you were saying about resistance of child psychology, which says to not voice negative commands such as do not do blank, which means now blank is a temptation. And I raise little boys. I now have little grandkids, and I can tell you that the minute you drop that idea in their head, there's a wheel that starts to spin. They are fucking figuring out how to do exactly what you told them not to do.
Of course, and you're programming them.
Yeah, we are.
You're the one who put it there.
Yeah,
perfect.
Wow. Just real quick, because it's come up a couple times already in this, and it's something you've spoken from the time I reconnected with you. It comes up at some point in almost every conversation we have. Just so that they can look into these things, can you tell our audience, can you give them a brief description of what human design is and what the gene keys are?
Yes, I'm more well versed in Gene Keys than human design. Though Gene Keys did come out of human design, and there are a lot of crossovers. So human design is a system that was downloaded by a man named Ra, and it, using your birth time and your astrology, it paints a picture of different energetic tendencies that are part of your makeup in this incarnation, and different channels of expression, and different there are different like chakras and channels that are defined or not defined. And like, for example, in human design, my crown chakra is undefined, and that means that it's extremely open all the time, which allows me to download a lot of information, and at the same time makes me susceptible to a lot of distraction and a lot of ideas that could also take me off track. The Gene Keys is a transmission that was downloaded by a brilliant man named Richard Rudd, and he had a 3-day awakening experience, and that was sort of the opening for this to come through. And then he spent 7 years writing the book. The lore behind it is well, hold on, let me bookmark that piece. The transmission, as I mentioned earlier, the Gene Keys is a system of awakening that delineates each of the 64 DNA codons as a pathway to enlightenment. So we all have all of these codons within our body, and they hold all of the 64 shadows that define the human experience, and then the gift frequency. So that's the up-leveled frequency of every shadow. Every shadow has one. No shadow is any worse than the other. They're all disgusting, and they're all laden with miracles. It's just how we work with them. And then the lore behind these Gene Keys is that the Bon, who were the Tibetan shamans that predated the Buddhists, the Bon had a practice of planting information in the causal plane for people to find during times of great awakening and great change. So allegedly, the Gene Keys are a terma. That's what they're called, the termas, these bits of information that are planted in the causal plane. So the Gene Keys were planted in the causal plane by Padmasambhava, who was the Buddha's first reincarnation. And the book was published in 2010. So it's really relatively new for this planet and this time. And those of us who are drawn to it right now, we're called the Tertons in the Tibetan tradition. And we're the ones who are unpacking the implications, because it's such a dense body of I would say work, but it's not work. It's a transmission. It's a living transmission. It synthesizes all of the spiritual traditions and all of the metaphysical traditions. It's very, very high vibing truth. As we've already established, I'm very much a stickler with language. And this is one of the only books that I've ever read where every word is perfect and vibes so high. It's absolutely my like desert island book. It's extremely transformative collection of truth. It's very much alive. I find the more I engage the Gene Keys, the more that time space will rearrange itself to support my learning and my own transformation. And for anyone who is drawn to the Gene Keys, my one piece of advice, because there is a personality mapping system. It's not even personality. It's they call it your hologenetic profile that you can get for free online. That being said, I encourage people to just work with the book for quite some time before diving into the me aspect of it, because it's very, very dense. And we can miss a lot when we get hung up with like, what am I? What's my thing?
Yeah, so when you first told me about it, I bought the book. I just haven't, it is a huge book. I just haven't had time to read it, but now listening to you describe it makes me want to set aside, like I want to like go on vacation and set aside time to read the book. It's a cool looking book too. You know what I mean? So I had her describe those things because both of these are ideas and issues that maybe in the future I would like to dive into a little more and will be discussed on the show. So I just kind of wanted to introduce that to everybody and thank you for that. Can you tell people So your book is coming out in November. Tell people what it's called.
So the book is called The New P Handbook, Volume 1, Little Languaging Hacks for Big Change. And the new P stands for the new paradigm. And it's short and it's accessible and it's breezy and it has some illustrations and it's really fun read. I really love the book and it'll be available on Amazon and probably some stores as well, November 1st.
And then tell people what you're doing with your coaching and your sessions and whatnot.
Yeah, so I'm offering quantum languaging coaching sessions. I work with everyone a little bit differently. It's all custom crafted based on what people are wanting to accomplish and what their specific challenges are. I'm offering free 15-minute introductory sessions. You can go on my website, quantumlanguaging.com, and link through to get in touch with me and schedule a session. The clients I prefer to work with are clients who are open to transformation and who are wanting to change their lives. That being said, quantum languaging is a super useful system as far as how we brand ourselves and how we present ourselves. It's really, I also really like working with healers and doctors because the language of healing is so important to the healing process. And I very often see doctors using disempowering languaging that tethers people to pathologies or, prognoses that aren't good or lengthy healing times. So those are people who I'm super excited to work with as well. And if you're at all curious, definitely reach out for a free 15-minute session. They're super fun.
Right on. Cool. Randy, do you have any questions about any of that stuff?
Well, maybe what we can do for a couple minutes here, I'd like to drop back into, we hit on this about law being words. And you just mentioned lawyers and the art of words and how wordsmithing and contouring of phrases and things like that are all part, I will say it's mind control because it is, but reversing the equation, I'm curious to know how you deal with an attorney in terms of reframing what they do, given that their entire job, as we talked about the word try, and everybody knows that the word try it's failure. That's encoding failure into exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
The minute that word shows up. And yet lawyers, trial lawyers, they are trying cases. Everything they do is about a trial.
It's all about failure.
We could have the same thing with scientists. We do trials on everything. And so we're trying all the time.
So we're basically admitting that our system is a failure.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying because it's based on a right-wrong paradigm. It's not based on truth. It's not based on cooperation or what's best for the whole. It's based on winning. There needs to be a winner and there needs to be a loser. And
instead of actually getting to truth. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm not actually interested in working with people in that paradigm.
Right.
There are plenty of systems, NLP and there are other means of manipulating language. We know, we see people using language in that way. This is definitely a new paradigm methodology, and I'm defining that, as I mentioned before. We're leaving a paradigm of divisiveness and scarcity and lack and win and lose and adversarial relating, and I use the word relating loosely. These are for people who are interested in expanding a paradigm of unity and cooperation and abundance and peace, and who really understand that we are one and that if one person loses, we all lose. So
the paradigm you're going for could just as easily be called the new paradise as it is the new paradigm, right?
It could be, and I don't feel like there's any need to elevate it, although it is lovely, because I just feel like that's a no-brainer, for me. So I'm not interested in, for sure, there was a time, Randy, when I first got into this work and I'm like, how am I going to market this? And I did think, wow, I could help so many lawyers win their cases. And that just doesn't feel like the best use of this work. And I'm so not interested in that at all.
Right. Yeah, I get that. Because you're still buying into a system that's adversarial by nature. I mean,
Exactly.
everything that we do in the system, and this isn't just the law system itself, even the medical system, we're fighting cancer. You know,
Exactly.
Right.
look at, and the more we fight something, the more of it we get.
Of
The war on
course.
terrorism. My God, we didn't have terrorism until we declared war on it, and all of a
Well,
sudden it was all over.
and
Exactly.
Danny and I were talking about the other day too, like we don't actually know anybody who's a racist, but everybody's so busy fighting racism right now, right? So what
Right.
would be the better, like, what would be the proper language around trying to deal with some of those kinds of issues that people want to create this fight against racism about? What would be the proper, a good language to help foster what honest people actually intend when they're dealing with those kinds of issues?
For me, it's unity. I mean, a girlfriend of mine was branding a new group that she's forming, and she was calling it End Racism. And she posted this on Facebook, and I was like, please no, like that's perpetuating this illusion of an issue. How about the unity dialogues? So it's anything that just enforces what we want. But to some extent, I feel like I don't even want to rebrand this conversation. This just doesn't even feel like a conversation we need to be having.
Yeah. No,
You know, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, I don't want to
totally.
run in there and tell people how to tackle this conversation. It's like there are so many much more crucial conversations that
You're
I'd
right.
like us to be having right now.
Yeah, no, you're right. You know, and I totally agree with you. And that it is very, it's annoying when people, like, we agree on this, and I think Randy does as well. We completely agree about that. But because we have to hear that all the time, it acts to infect but I agree with you completely. I don't even think it's actually a thing. So we shouldn't have to be talking about how we should talk about it, because it actually isn't a thing.
Well, I think the best way to talk about things sometimes is to model what we want rather than talking about what we don't want. You know,
Exactly.
if you don't want racism in your world, don't be a racist. Don't be a bigot. Don't be a homophobe. All of those,
Totally.
those total terms. But the simple fact of the matter is, each one of us has something inside of us that is exclusivist, the exclusionary. That's the part of it that we wage on the inside of. I've done this. It's been a long process of dealing with certain things that I realized I grew up with that were part of my makeup, that were prejudicial, whether it was racially, sexually, socioeconomically, whatever. We all come from places where we have discriminated, but inclusion is an action. It is basically not drawing these lines anymore and not excluding and not making an issue of not excluding, because the minute you bring it up,
I totally agree. It's an internal excavation. It's an internal conversation of looking at our prejudices, which we all have, and making the internal adjustment. And at the same time that, like, right now it's become such a hot button and a huge issue when there are real issues threatening our entire species, and we're not talking about them because we have this trumped up divide. When, like you said, like, let's just work on it internally.
Well, you have the fake race wars. I mean, we talked about Black Lives Matter, Intifada, all of these reactionary finance groups that are out there creating the schisms that actually don't exist a whole lot.
Right.
I walk through Black neighborhoods. I don't have a problem. Vibrationally, nope. I feel and I did when I lived in New York City. I lived in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. I felt very at ease with the people around me. You know, I felt comfortable going to a gay nightclub. I didn't feel threatened by that. I don't feel threatened, for the most part, by the diversity around me. So somebody is socially engineering a lot of these divisions into the psyche of humanity right now to continue this. More maybe my conspiracy type mindset, or is that really what's going on?
But I agree, because, like, Emma and I were talking, like, don't get me wrong, there is a problem with institutionalized racism. There's a problem with what's going on in the prison system. There's a problem with cops racially profiling people, and even now TSA agents are doing it. But the problem isn't in, like, how I'm treating my fellow man or how I'm treated by my fellow man. That, at least that isn't my experience of it. And all this feels like a distraction from these larger issues, which is why I said, like, it would be way more appropriate to call Black Lives Matter cops or dicks. And then we know what to deal with.
and then everybody would agree.
Right.
Right. Except for the few like, you know, military and cop worshipers out there, but for the most part, everybody would agree. But yeah, no, that is, yeah, that's right. And of course, the institution that is racist is the government, which winds us back to the whole, the whole beginning of the conversation anyway.
Right.
That's like the institution, the only institution that I really know of that is, or that's the one that sort of sits atop all of the others that are.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a really awesome little rundown here. I really enjoyed this. Randy, do you have anything to say? Dani, do you have anything else you want to leave everyone with before we go? This will not be the last time. Will not be the last time we have a conversation. So
this was super fun. I love your guys' show. I'm honored to have been invited on as a guest, and I had a great time. Thank you.
Awesome. Randy?
Oh, sorry, I had my mic muted. No. It's finally been fun to sit down and talk with Dani Katz, because we share your drawings on Facebook a lot, and every once in a while I get one of them when I'm looking at Facebook in the morning, and I wind up blowing coffee all over my screen. something that you put there. This is, you know, you kind of define something that Emily and I've been talking about, because one of the mandates we see about it is we're kind of trying to engineer, think, grapple, grope, all these kinesthetic things that we want to do to try and push this thing forward. That Emily said at one time, she said the only way we really can deal with this is to create our way out of this.
Right.
Hopefully I didn't do entrapment language with that one, but kind of epitomize a person who creatively engages the world on multiple levels and kind of springboards off of it into what I call a higher energy vibration. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the work that you do.
Oh, thanks, Randy. Thank you.
Yay. Well said, Randy. All right.
Thanks.
Well, then, should we go ahead and wrap it up? Anything else here, kids?
We can.
All right.
All right. That's going to be it for this time. We'll be back. Oh, we've got a big show coming up soon. I'll be in Houston. By the time you see this, I'll be back because we're in time delay, but I'll fill you in on what happens there, and things are about to get interesting. This is All Planet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins with Emily Moyer, our guest, Dani Katz. Thanks for stopping by. And the truth is out there. It's inside you. Go find some of that stuff.